Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are getting into some really foundational and maybe, let's be honest, some challenging material. Leviticus chapter 17 and 18.
Yeah, absolutely. We're exploring what we often call the liminal space. You have to picture the people of Israel sort of caught in this identity crisis.
Right.
They're out of Egypt physically, but maybe not culturally.
Right, yeah.
And they're not yet in Canaan, the promised land.
Yeah.
So they're kind of nowhere, culturally speaking.
Trying to figure out who they are.
Exactly. Unlearning the past, trying to build something completely new. And the foundation for that new thing is holiness.
And it's fascinating how that definition of holiness, this new identity, it's laid out across two chapters that at first glance seem pretty different. Chapter 17, lots about sacrifice, blood.
Ritual stuff.
And then chapter 18 jumps into rules about bodies, sex, family structures, very different focus. So our mission today is to see how these two apparently distinct sets of rules actually work together.
They have to. That's the key. They combine to shape this single, unified, and crucially distinct community. If you miss that connection, you really only get half the story.
Okay.
The whole idea is setting up what we could call a holy contrast against the cultures all around them.
A holy contrast. I like that. So where do we start? Chapter 17.
Let's start there. Leviticus 17. It really lays down the theological cornerstone, centralizing life and worship.
Okay, let's unpack that. The core principle seems incredibly powerful. Life itself belongs entirely to Yhwh, to God.
Precisely. And the text makes this super concrete. It says, the life of the flesh is in the blood.
Right. I remember reading that.
So if life is in the blood, then blood becomes this incredibly potent symbol of life itself. It's sacred, reserved specifically for one purpose, atonement on the altar.
Which means you don't mess with it.
You absolutely do not. Consuming it is strictly forbidden. Life belongs to God, so its symbol, the blood, can't be treated casually, definitely not ingested.
And this rule, it wasn't just for the Israelites by birth, was it?
No, and that's huge. It explicitly applies to the strangers who sojourn among them, too. It's like a fundamental rule of belonging in this community. If you're living with us, this value applies to you.
So it immediately establishes a shared sacred boundary for everyone inside the camp.
Yes, and it's so practical, too, even down to hunting. If you hunt a wild animal, say a deer or a bird, you're allowed to eat.
You still have to deal with the blood properly.
You do. You have to drain the blood out and, interestingly, cover it with earth. It's this gesture of respect, acknowledging the life that was taken, returning it symbolically to the ground, even when you're going to eat the animal.
Wow, okay. That respect for life, symbolized by the blood, then connects to the next big rule in chapter 17, the centralization part.
Directly. Verse 3 lays it out very clearly. Any animal that's going to be a sacrifice, specifically it mentions peace offerings, those fellowship meals must be brought to the entrance of the tent of meeting, the tabernacle.
It has to happen there. But why? I mean, practically speaking, what's the big danger of doing it, say, just outside the camp? Seems more convenient.
Convenience isn't the priority here. Holiness is. The risk is massive, and it's twofold. First, there's an immediate, terrifying consequence.
Yeah.
Killing an animal intended for worship anywhere else incurs blood guilt. That's the term used.
Blood guilt. That sounds serious, like more than just a penalty.
Oh, much more. It's not a fine. It's basically a capital offense. You've violated the sanctity of life and the designated place of atonement. You put your own life, your own standing in the community at risk.
So the stakes are literally life and death.
They absolutely are.
Right.
And the second risk is just as dangerous for the community's identity. It's about syncretism, mixing faiths.
Right, you mentioned that earlier.
The text tells us this centralization rule is there to stop the people from offering sacrifices to goat demons after whom they whore.
Goat demons. Okay, what are we talking about here? Actual goat-like demons.
Well, the Hebrew term is serum. It means hairy ones. It likely refers to local pagan deities, maybe nature spirits or gods worshipped in the wilderness, often depicted in satyr-like forms. Think Pan, maybe. These were associated with wild, uncontrolled spaces outside the ordered camp.
Got it. So sacrificing out in the fields or under a tree somewhere opened the door to worshiping these other entities, maybe alongside YHWH, maybe instead.
Exactly. It's the illegitimate mixing of true worship with these local pagan traditions. The central tabernacle acts like a spiritual filter, or maybe a quarantine zone, as you said. It prevents that slide into worshiping other gods.
So it forces a choice. You're either all in with YHWH at his designated place, or you're outside.
Precisely. Centralized worship builds that shared faith, shared values, enforces accountability. It's how they constantly reaffirm, together, We are not Egypt behind us, and we are not Canaan ahead of us. We are something different.
And the command isn't just restrictive, it's framed as an invitation.
Yes, a divine invitation to unity, to a deeper collective connection with God, rather than the scattering and, frankly, corruption that happens when everyone just does their own thing religiously.
That makes perfect sense. Unity versus scattering. And that idea of order versus corruption feels like the perfect bridge into chapter 18.
It really is. Because if chapter 17 is about God establishing ownership over life itself, symbolized by the blood and demanding ritual purity,
then chapter 18 is about God establishing ownership over the relationships that structure that life, symbolized by the body and demanding moral justice.
Beautifully put. If God owns life, he gets to dictate how that life is ordered, how it's created, how it's sustained through healthy relationships. Chapter 18 is, you could say, the ultimate call to contrast.
And it doesn't mince words. The command is incredibly direct. You shall not do as they do in the land of Egypt, and you shall not do as they do in the land of Canaan.
Right. They're being defined almost in the negative first. Don't be like them, don't be like them. Reject the cultural norms on both sides of this journey.
To really feel the weight of these laws in chapter 18, we need to understand what they're actually doing in Egypt and Canaan, right? What was the context?
Absolutely. Egypt, where they came from, was this ancient, incredibly powerful hierarchical society. Think pharaohs, pyramids, a system where power was concentrated and the potential for exploiting the vulnerable was, well, systemic.
Okay, so a context of potential power abuse, and Canaan, where they were going.
Canaanite culture, from what we know archaeologically and from other texts, was heavily focused on fertility cults. Religious practices were often tied directly to ensuring the land's fertility, tribal power. And this often involved things like ritual prostitution, possibly child sacrifice in some areas, and generally very different, maybe more fluid or unstable, sexual and familial boundaries compared to what Leviticus is demanding.
So the laws in Leviticus 18 are like putting up guardrails against both the Egyptian model of power abuse and the Canaanite model of, say, sexual and religious instability.
That's a great way to put it. Guardrails against the selfishness and chaos they saw, or were warned about, in both cultures. Their distinctiveness as God's people had to be rooted in something different, you could say, in God's character, which is fundamentally about selflessness and order, not exploitation or chaos.
Rejecting the world's shortcuts, as you put it earlier.
Exactly. And here's a crucial insight for understanding Leviticus, and maybe holiness in general.
Yeah.
It's not just about your private conscience. It's not just between you and God, secretly.
Okay.
Holiness, as Leviticus presents it, shapes entire households. It shapes communal patterns. It's about how you structure society so that it functions justly and protects the people most at risk, the poor, the widow, the orphan, the stranger, and also women and children within the family unit itself.
That's why that phrase keeps coming up. Holiness is love ordered rightly. It's about structuring relationships correctly.
Precisely. Love needs structure to be just and effective, not just sentimental. And that makes sense of the very specific, very comprehensive list of prohibitions that follows in chapter 18.
Yeah, it's quite a list, and it focuses so intensely on sexual and familial boundaries. That phrase, uncover nakedness, just keeps appearing. How many times?
I think it's 18 times in this chapter alone. It underscores that the health of the entire community is seen as starting with the integrity and stability of the most basic unit, the family, the household.
So the list covers what kinds of things specifically?
It's really detailed. It prohibits incestuous relationships, sleeping with close relatives like your mother, your father's wife, stepmother, your sister or half-sister, granddaughters, aunts, daughters-in-law, sister-in-law. It's building protective walls within the family.
Okay, protecting the internal structure. What about external threats?
It covers those too.
Yeah.
Adultery specifically, your neighbor's wife is forbidden, protecting the neighboring household.
And then there are these other prohibitions that seem almost universally shocking.
Yes, things that were apparently practiced by some surrounding cultures, but are presented here as complete abominations, totally incompatible with YHWH worship. Sacrificing children to the god Molech, for instance.
Gosh.
Absolutely. And then it lists male homosexual acts, lying with a male as with a woman, calling it an abomination, and bestiality as well.
So, connecting this back, all these prohibited acts, whether incest, adultery, child sacrifice, or the others, they all fundamentally destabilize that core household unit and violate the created order as Leviticus sees it.
Exactly. They undermine the stable, life-giving structure that God intends for human flourishing within the community. And the text draws a direct and pretty chilling line between these actions and the fate of the Canaanites.
Right. It says the nations being driven out, the ones who lived in Canaan before Israel, they committed these very abominations.
And notice the consequence described. It wasn't just that God was judging them externally. The text says the land itself became unclean, defiled by these actions.
To the point that the land vomited out its inhabitants. That's such a visceral image.
It is. It suggests that moral pollution has tangible, almost environmental consequences. And the warning to Israel is stark. If you adopt these same practices, the land will vomit you out too.
So, staying in the land, thriving in the land, is directly tied to the moral health of their relationships, their households. It's not just about having the right rituals from chapter 17.
Not at all. The moral foundation, defined in chapter 18, is presented as the ultimate security policy. How you handle your most intimate relationships isn't arbitrary. It reflects God's justice, God's character, and determines whether you, as a community, can even remain in God's presence in the promised land.
Okay, this is really clarifying how the two chapters work together, but let's dig into the language for a moment because it's so specific. That key phrase, uncover nakedness. It sounds almost gentle, polite.
It does sound euphemistic to our ears, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it's used for these really serious violations. What exactly does it signify within the context of Leviticus? What's the legal weight of that Hebrew phrase?
Well, within this legal code, it's not just a casual euphemism. It functions as a precise technical term. Uncovering nakedness specifically means illicit sexual relations, relations outside of marriage, or crucially here, incestuous relations. It's the legal shorthand for sexual misconduct violating these boundaries.
Okay, so understanding that specific legal meaning is key. And you're saying this understanding can actually help us interpret other parts of the Bible, maybe parts that have seemed a bit obscure.
Exactly. This is where understanding the legal context of Leviticus pays off. The text itself acts like its own dictionary, helping us define terms.
Yeah.
Look at Leviticus 18, verse 7.
Okay, verse 7.
It says, "You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father," which is the nakedness of your mother. It explicitly links the father's nakedness in this context to the mother.
Ah, I see. So it's not about seeing the father nude.
No. And then if you look later in Leviticus chapter 20, verse 11, it confirms this definition even more clearly. It states the penalty for a man who lies with his father's wife. He has, quote, uncovered his father's nakedness.
Okay, so the law explicitly defines uncovering the father's nakedness as having sexual relations with the father's wife, presumably, his stepmother in many cases, or perhaps even his mother.
Yes. That's the legal definition provided within the text itself.
Now that is a massive clue, because if we take that specific legal definition from Leviticus and apply it backwards to that really difficult story in Genesis 9, the story of Noah's drunkenness.
The story of Ham seeing his father Noah's nakedness, yes.
If uncovering nakedness means what Leviticus says it means, then Ham's offense wasn't simply accidentally seeing his father passed out drunk and naked.
It potentially shifts the whole meaning, doesn't it? It suggests the offense might have been far more severe, an act of sexual impropriety. Perhaps Ham violated Noah's wife, who might have been Ham's mother or stepmother.
Wow, okay.
Now, this is an interpretation connecting the texts, but it's one that many scholars find compelling because it seemed to resolve a major puzzle in the Genesis story.
Which puzzle is that?
Why Noah, upon waking up, curses Ham's son Canaan, instead of cursing Ham directly. If Ham's transgression was actually sexual violation involving his mother's stepmother, and Canaan was the offspring resulting from that forbidden union.
Then cursing Canaan makes a kind of tragic legal sense within that framework. The curse falls on the product of the illicit act.
It potentially explains it, yes.
That
It shows a continuity. Genesis hints at the severity of violating these fundamental relational boundaries right from the beginning, near the dawn of the post-flood world. And then Leviticus 18 comes along and formally codifies these boundaries into law for the nation of Israel.
Providing that clear framework for holiness and justice within the family and community.
Exactly. It shows the deep roots of these laws. They weren't just invented in the desert. They're presented as reflecting a much older, fundamental moral order.
That connection really does tie the legal code back into the bigger story beautifully. Okay, so let's step back now. We've looked at chapter 17, chapter 18, the Genesis connection. If we synthesize all this, what are the key takeaways? We see ritual purity from 17 and ethical justice from 18.
Working together, absolutely. They are the twin marks of holiness for this community, trying to define itself in that liminal space. We can almost see it in three layers. defining what it means to belong, and importantly, what allows God's holy presence to actually remain among them.
Okay, 3 layers. What's layer 1?
Layer 1 is blood, coming straight from Leviticus 17. The core idea: life belongs to God.
Right, and that requires
Ritual reverence, centralized worship, treating all life, even animal life taken for food or sacrifice, with a certain dignity because it ultimately belongs to its creator.
Okay, blood is layer 1. Layer 2.
Layer 2 is body, from Leviticus 18. The principle here is that our relationships, especially our most intimate ones, must reflect God's character, his justice, his order, his protection.
So this demands sexual integrity, clear ethical boundaries.
That specifically prioritize protecting the vulnerable within the family and the wider community structure, preventing exploitation and chaos.
Blood, body. What's the 3rd layer?
The 3rd layer is belonging. It's the result of the first 2. The community itself must be distinct, marked by holiness,
So,
by actively rejecting those cultural shortcuts, the selfishness, the power abuses, the instability they saw or knew from Egypt and Canaan. They must prioritize this integrated holiness in their worship, layer 1, in their bodies and households, layer 2, and therefore in their entire public life as a distinct people.
so true holiness isn't just one thing. It's where that ritual reverence from chapter 17 meets the social responsibility, the justice from chapter 18.
That's the intersection. You can't claim to have pure worship if you ignore justice for the vulnerable, and you can't claim to be pursuing true justice if your worship is corrupted or directed elsewhere. It has to be rooted together in God's character. Back to that idea. Holiness is love ordered rightly.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what does this deep dive into ancient laws mean for you listening today? It sounds like these Levitical commands weren't just random fences to keep Israel from having any fun.
Not at all. Think of them more like a spiritual syntax, a grammar for living.
A grammar. I like that.
Yeah, a structure that protected life, preserved the social fabric, and, crucially, made it possible for a holy God to dwell safely among his people without consuming them.
So the final thought for you, the listener, is maybe something like this.
We all live in liminal spaces, constantly navigating cultural pressures, maybe an Egypt of past habits or comforts, and a Canaan of tempting, maybe selfish future possibilities.
So the question becomes personal.
Right. For you, how are you identifying those pressures right now? Where's the call in your life for moral distinctiveness? How are you ensuring that purity in your values and justice in your actions, especially towards the vulnerable, actually work together?
Because the call ultimately is still to reflect God's character in all these layers.
We show God's holiness when our worship, our bodies, our relationships, our public life, when all of it starts to mirror his character.
That's our deep dive into the liminal space of Leviticus 17 and 18. Thanks for joining us.
In your light I never stray. Every step I trust your plan, standing strong where I am. Holy, holy, sing it loud. Lift our voices to the cloud. In your grace we always